Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you. Today, I'm going to talk about a high-throughput, high-resolution PGT-A workflow with polyploidy contamination detection. I'd like to thank my team who helped to generate the data that you're going to see and to develop the product that I'm going to talk about. So today we're talking about preimplantation genetic testing for aneuploidy or PGT-A, and I'm sure all of you know that this is part of assisted reproductive technologies. The increase in maternal age is driving an increase in failure to implant and miscarriages. Those have been shown to correlate. And what PGT-A does is to try and detect aneuploidies. But because we're working with day 5 trophectoderm biopsies, we're just working with a few cells each, maybe 3 to 10 cells in one of those biopsies. So we need to do some form of whole genome amplification in order to extract the genetic information. What I'm going to be talking about is a platform. We are bringing our ReproSeq PGS system to our new Genexus platform. So this system uses our SingleSeq library prep to perform that whole genome amplification and add sample DNA barcodes onto our libraries. Then they go into our integrated sequencer, and that produces the results in the form of PGT-A plots, as you can see at the bottom here. I want to talk a little bit about capacity before then I talk about our experiment and the results that we achieved. So on the Genexus platform, we run a chip called the GX5. It is divided into 4 lanes. Those can be run one at a time or all at once. The only requirement is that all lanes get run within about 2 weeks from the initial initialization. On each of those lanes, we produce between 12 and 16 million reads. And the way we have set up our PGT-A system is that we can support up to 48 libraries in one lane, or across all 4 lanes, 192 total libraries. So that's the high throughput part. Now we'll talk about our high resolution. So we ran an experiment with these chips, the system, and our SingleSeq library preparation reagents. We used purified cell line genomic DNAs in lieu of embryo biopsies, but we dilute these down to 15 picograms of input. So that's just about 2 cells worth of DNA. We use these cell line samples because they have small CNVs that are known and have been characterized. Each sample carries 1 CNV that's in the size range between 8.6 and 9.9 megabase pairs. So we colloquially talk about that as being about 10 megabase pair CNVs. Some of the samples carry additional CNVs that are outside the target range. We're not really concerned with performance there. We do very well for larger events, chromosome arm events, and whole chromosome events, but we're really trying to get to a resolution down to about 10 megabase pairs here. We had 14 unique samples. 9 of those had CNV losses, and 5 of them had CNV gains. And we would build sets of 48 libraries where we would take those 14 samples, run 4 of them in quadruplicate and 8 of them in triplicate to make a total of 48. And to generate lots of data for this, we sequenced 6 different batches of those 48 samples. So we ended up using a total of 6 lanes. The way we determine if we have scored an event and have a positive result that's a true positive or a false positive is to take a look at the expected CNVs in the cell line and look at see the automated CNV calls that we get and compare those. So in the plot at the bottom, you can see one example. We have an event shown in blue, which is a gain on chromosome 10. It is about 30 megabase pairs. This is outside of our target size range, so this is one of the CNVs that we're not going to pay attention to. But you can see there's a very small loss on chromosome 21. This is a 9.5 megabase pair CNV event. And so these are the events that we're looking for. We need to call the right ploidy value, so we need to call it as a copy number of 1 if it's expected to be a loss, or a copy number 3 if it's expected to be a gain, in order to match the truth. And then we want the breakpoints. We want the start and the stop of that CNV event, as we call it, to be within 5 megabase pairs of where the known CNV event is in that sample. So if we're within 5 megabase pairs, then we'll call it as a true positive. That sample now is a true positive. If we do not call it at all, or we call it the wrong ploidy, or we have the breakpoints outside of 5 megabase pairs away from the true breakpoints, then we will call that as a false negative. And also, if we have called that event in the incorrect place, it becomes a false positive as well. If we see any other event that we don't expect to see in that sample, then we will score it as a false positive. So this table summarizes the results from the test. We had a total of 288 libraries. Of those, we called the correct 10 megabase pair event in 284 of them, leaving just four false negatives. And we had no unexpected events called. We had no false positive events. So that gives us a sensitivity of 98.6% and a specificity of 100%. For the rest of the talk, I'd like to go into a new development that we introduced along with the standard PGT-A for the Genexus platform. We're going to talk about using a polyploidy panel to get SNP information out of these samples. So what we do is we end up splitting the sample, but we split it after we've done whole genome amplification, or after we've completed the SingleSeq libraries and added the DNA barcodes. That's because the sample is in principle an embryo biopsy, and we cannot divide up the cells in that biopsy. So we need to do a whole genome amplification first, and then we're free to pipette some of that material and divert it for another purpose. So we can take one sample and get a PGT-A result using the SingleSeq library and sequencing that. And we could take a portion of that sample and get SNP information using an AmpliSeq library, using our new polyploidy panel. From that SNP information, we want to get 3 things. We want to identify triploid samples. We want to see if there's any maternal contamination in our samples. And we want to run a sibling QC check to see that the samples that we expect are related to each other are indeed related to each other. So to talk a little bit more about that, I wanted to highlight the fact that with standard PGT-A, we cannot detect triploid females. That is, samples that are 69XXX have all chromosomes at copy number 3, including the X chromosome. And from a standard PGT-A analysis perspective, that's indistinguishable from having all chromosomes at copy number 2. For 69XXY male triploids, we do see a change or an effect on the PGT-A plot, because while all the autosomes are at copy number 3, the X and the Y are imbalanced at copy numbers 2 and 1 respectively. And so therefore we see those divert away from the standard male, where we'd expect 1 copy each of X and Y. But for females, we cannot detect them with the standard PGT-A methods. We also can't detect if there's maternal contamination. So if the cumulus cells have not been stripped from the oocyte, then we could be carrying forward with the biopsy some maternal DNA, and that will skew the PGT-A results towards normal, or towards the mother's karyotype, and away from the embryo karyotype. And finally, we can't tell if samples are related to each other through the PGT-A plots unless they're carrying common translocations. So to give a quick overview of our diploid, triploid, and haploid calling, we do this by assessing allele frequencies of heterozygous alleles from the SNPs that we detect with our polyploidy panel. We expect that a normal diploid sample would have a normal distribution of allele frequencies centered around 50% for heterozygotes. And we expect if there's a triploid that we will have a bimodal distribution where the peaks will be centered at 33% and 67%, and we will move away from normality. Our test cannot detect directly if a sample is tetraploid or has a higher ploidy level, but it will call such samples as triploid because they diverge from the normal expectation of a diploid. In addition to looking at allele frequencies, we also must see some evidence of triallelic sites in these samples. So these are sites where there are 3 different alleles present, which you can have if you have 3 haplotypes present, but not if you have just a normal diploid sample with 2 haplotypes. So we require to see at least 3 triallelic sites and an estimated contamination level of 20%. Now, this is not true contamination. This is simply coming from a triploid. You will have 3 haplotypes present, and that can often appear as though it is contaminated. We also do haploid calling. That's just based on if we have a very low proportion of heterozygous sites, then there's a chance that that sample is indeed haploid and not a diploid. So let's look at some data. This is output from some tests we ran where we use, again, cell line genomic DNA, but we have cell lines which are known to be triploid, and then we have cell lines which are known to be diploid, and also they're part of pedigrees, and we know the relationships of those samples. So this is output from our ReproSeq SNP analysis plugin, where we can see that we are making calls about the status and the polyploidy level of these samples. And if you look at the first row, we see that they're abnormal and triploid by call. And if you look at the boxed area of the sample name, you can see those align perfectly with our triploid samples that we put into the test. Below those, you can see the diploids boxed in green. And again, we're making the correct calls, calling those as normal diploids. Now, I mentioned before to call as a triploid, we also would like to see 3 triallelic sites. That's the last column or the rightmost column. True triploid will also appear as though it's contaminated. We'll have at least 3 triallelic microhaplotype sites, and the contamination level in the second to rightmost column should exceed 20%. And that's a way that we screen out potential false positives because triploids are relatively rare. We don't want to make false positive calls for triploids. So let's move on and talk a little bit about maternal contamination detection. This is based only on having triallelic microhaplotype sites. So I've mentioned that term before. Microhaplotype site is an amplicon which covers more than one SNP, and so we get phased information about how those SNPs, not only which SNPs are present, but how those SNPs are arranged, which ones are, which alleles are segregating with each other. So we look at those triallelic microhaplotype sites to determine the level of maternal contamination. We have to see at least 3 sites be triallelic to call sample as contaminated, and then we estimate the level of contamination by looking at the mean of the 3rd allele frequencies. High contamination is anything we estimate to be 30% or more, and low contamination is anything below 30%. We know that we can detect contamination down to 5%, and then sometimes lower than 5%. We can also pick up contamination, but it's not 100% reliable. If there's very high contamination, if the sample is almost entirely maternal, to this test, it will look like there's very little or no contamination because we can't distinguish between, the biopsy sample and the cumulus cell sample unless you also run a maternal sample, and then you could look and see if it's highly related to the contaminated samples. So just to look at what our results appear like in the table, we're looking at a very similar table here, but now we're looking at the contamination column. And these samples, we have mixed in various amounts of maternal DNA with the child DNA. We have 0% or 100% maternal DNA, those are going to be pure samples. And then boxed, I show where we have samples with 20% or 30% maternal DNA. Those are going to appear as contaminated samples. In the contamination column, I've highlighted that we detect contamination in the 20% and 30% contaminated samples, but not in the samples that are pure. Those we report as no contamination. And our contamination estimates are not exactly precise. They're not directly on, but you can see that we are detecting in some cases roughly 20% or 30% contamination. The first example we called the 20% contamination as over 30%. So it's, again, just an estimate of contamination level, but it can help us to detect if there's any contamination in the sample. And the last topic I'll talk about is how we can use the SNP information to get sibling QC. So sibling QC uses a couple ID. The person running the samples knows the relationships of those samples, and they know which couple produced which embryo biopsies. And so we use that couple ID information that the user supplies to estimate the number of families that should be in the sample, and then we cluster the samples. We exclude very poorly covered samples because they tend not to cluster correctly, but anything with a decent number of reads will be included. We divide the clusters up into the same number of groups as the expected number of families, and then we ask, do the members of the families, do they fall into a cluster where they were expected to belong? So we can visualize that a bit better in the output. If a sample is aligning with its couple ID in the clustering, then we give it a pass, a simple pass on the sibling QC metric, but you can dive deeper and look at a dendrogram of those clusters. And here what we're seeing is 48 samples that we've run. We're running some triploid samples here in replicate, so those cluster very tightly. Those are the groups in the middle where they have very short node lengths. And then we have sets of diploid samples, which are parts of families. They're out of known pedigrees. These are siblings of each other. You can see they're also clustering, but with a longer node length shown in red. And so we're able to tell that each of these family members is clustered in the correct group, and we can report back that they're passing the sibling QC test. We also provide a heat map, which shows the degree of relatedness. So you can see, again, sibling groups here are shown in more of a white color. They're roughly half related to each other, and the sample replicates are coming up in the red color, where they're very strongly related to each other. So to summarize what I've talked about today, I've introduced you to our ReproSeq product on our Ion Torrent Genexus integrated sequencer. For PGT-A, we are able to support 48 samples per lane or 192 per chip, and we have high sensitivity and specificity when calling CNVs down to about 10 megabase pairs. And we're also introducing a polyploidy panel where you can generate targeted libraries from split WGA material to gather SNP information that can tell you if your samples are diploid, triploid, or haploid. It can also detect if there's maternal contamination present, and we can use that to do a nice little QC test and tell that the samples that we expect to be related to each other are indeed related to each other, and there haven't been sample mix-ups. So with that, I will thank you for your attention, and I hope to speak with you in the Q&A section.